Welcome everybody back to the After Dark Show. I'm Don Rogers. Thank you for joining me once again. This is episode 2 of season 2. I'm really happy to have back an amazing guest tonight. He's an author and he wrote the book High Strangeness: A Lifetime of Alien and Paranormal Encounters. And his name is Michael Kameron. And I had him on last season, and I've actually had a chance to listen to his book now. And it's absolutely amazing. I'm going to say this before we even get into talking to him. If you get a chance to check this out on audio or you have the time to read it, absolutely pick this up. It's an amazing read. It's an amazing listen. It's one of the most articulate and visually descriptive books I've heard or read on this particular subject matter. So I really want to thank you for joining me again. Thank you, Michael.
Hello, Don. Thank you for having me back on your show.
Yeah. Just trying to open the chat there. No, so I actually got a chance to listen to your book. And like I was saying, it's just brilliantly written. Like your articulation and description truly, I have a very visual sense of mind. And
Sure.
The way your book is written, I could see everything. Like I could walk through your house that you describe as a child. Like the way you put it together was just brilliant. So I
Thank you.
it takes a lot to keep my attention, especially with attention deficit disorder and a full-time job.
Sure.
And I was happy to sit down for 4.5 hours and listen to it because it was just incredible.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah.
Appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And-
I mean, I try to write it in a way that, where people can see what I'm describing rather than just say the words. I wanted to make it as detailed. And when I talk about it on podcasts, it's much more interesting when you're reading it.
No, absolutely. And it was like I listened to it in one sitting. I was hooked as soon as I got into it. It was just like something you can't put down. Like I said, I listened to it, but I couldn't stop. I had to listen to it end to end before, like I ended up with 3 pages of notes for the interview. I doubt we'll get to all of it, but yeah. So now that I've actually, like you and I had an amazing discussion the last time you were on the show, and I would love to have you back again because you've touched on a couple of things in your book that I think are completely different subjects that we could probably have an entire discussion about.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, it is. It was just mind-blowing. I think one of the best ways for the listeners to really get a sense of what you went through is if you can give a description of like where and what your house was like as a child.
Yeah, I was born in London, in the East End of London. And I actually lived on the grounds of a Roman Catholic school, a junior school, which I actually attended as a child. My house was just inside the grounds itself, but my house was owned by the Roman Catholic Church. So my dad was like the schoolkeeper or caretaker who looked after the school. But the house itself was actually built on a Roman burial ground for lepers. So it was actually built on a cemetery going back to Roman times. And so my book is primarily focused on my childhood home inside and the surrounding areas of the school grounds and inside the school itself, where a lot of this type of activity that I wrote about in my book is centered upon. And when I was writing the book, I found out a lot more information about its history, and of course, as you do, now as an adult, I've discovered a lot more about myself and my experiences. And sometimes, what I talk about in my book, in this first book, I will be writing a second book, but the second book will be primarily, not all of it, but most of it will be focused upon the secret space program, classified military projects, unclassified programs, subprograms, and the futuristic soldier programs.
That's another subject that you and I could have an entire conversation on, because that was actually part of my spiritual awakening, was regaining some of my own personal super soldier memories from something that's
Yeah,
happening in a distant time from now. But so yeah, that's an entirely different conversation that you and I could get into probably in depth, and I'd love to do that with Dan as well. Um, I'm still looking
yeah.
for a date for that, but uh, you had mentioned that the Catholic Church owned your childhood home, and something that struck me as I was listening to you or listening to your book was: do you think that there's a possibility of any of the activities that had gone on church grounds attributing to some of the paranormal things that went on in your home, or do you think it's more related to the graveyard end of things?
I don't think the church in that sense had anything to do with what was happening there. I mean, and I don't think now that the graveyard itself underneath the house, or on at least under the blueprints, had anything to do with any of the activity that was going on with me, purely because of the information I've discovered more about myself and my birth and so forth. I think it was more it was just there. Maybe it did have some sort of energetic, like a ceiling, it's like putting cement on something, but I don't think, from what I've discovered now, which, I will relay more of that in my second book, is I don't think it did. I mean, of course, the church did have an influence on me because of their teachings, what they were chucking down your throat, basically.
Yeah.
And that part of it was difficult because um, being spiritually aware as a child, I didn't really believe much in the doctrinations of the church and how they presented things, themselves.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into this. What is it like for you to, like, in your daily life, to try and explain to people about the interactions and events of your life and even some of your abductions? Like, is that something you go into in your day-to-day life, or is that just kind of a different part? Like,
Well, they say with a lot of abductees that we have second lives. We have the life that we show to people in the everyday world, like many of us do. We have the masks. I mean, when I was growing up and I was having these experiences, from other people's perspective, if I spoke about it as a teenager, say, or a young adult, you would get the, you're weird, or, you're strange because you're different from everyone else around you, and that's going to have an impact because you're not, in a way, you're stepping outside of that inner circle. And my inner circles at that time were Roman Catholics, and that's quite difficult. And these were the old school type Catholics, they wasn't very open minded to that type of stuff. But going forward now, I mean, I am, as you know, Don, I'm a SSP military whistleblower, but when if I don't really talk about this type of stuff to anyone really. My life's quite isolated, really, and it has been since a child. It's and it's not because back then, I did have like a lot of people in the SSP and the people that have paranormal experiences and or alien abduction. It did affect you then, it did hurt your feelings because you're trying to explain this strange type of phenomena you're having. You're trying to look for people that have similar experiences, but I never had that. So then I was tormented a lot. So it took a long time for me to overcome that. But in today's, 2025, I'm okay with people and what they think. If people don't believe me, the only thing that I often say is, don't be disrespectful. It's all right to have an opinion, and I also respect the fact that people are not everyone has the experiences that we have, and obviously that they may want to know more, and they may, they may not believe it, but that's fine if they don't believe it. I'm not really bothered about that. I know what my experiences are. I don't gain anything from this. I'm just telling my story. So, and I'm putting myself out there. So you're pretty vulnerable when you're doing this.
no, I agree. Like, when I first started trying to explain even to my own family what happened when I started getting my memories back, like the best I could get with my mom was I explained like I was experiencing a different stage of my conscious existence where I was doing this. And she thought about it for like a day and came back and she's like, I understand Sylvia Brown, right? Which
Yeah.
is a famous author that talks about past lives. And I'm like, that's that's okay, right? And sometimes you just have to take that as the win. Like she tried to
Yeah.
understand what I was talking about. She tried to understand that I had these memories that I haven't done as Dawn, but I've done them as a different stage of my existence and a different stage of my consciousness, and I can now remember them for some reason. So that was a very I understand that it is something that you don't just like blurt out in front of everybody because like it's not like I would tell my boss or my coworkers about it because they won't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to look, some people might be talking about something, and I'm not going to really go in and say, I'm this, that, or the other. But also, I've been asked a few times from people if they think, that their kids are abductees. And you have to be careful as well with that because, um, sometimes by telling somebody that it can cause a lot of problems for that, person. And you have to weigh it up, I think, as well with reason as well. You have to look at each person's case differently, looking for other factors. Not not everyone who has sleep paralysis is going to be an abductee. There could be many reasons why how we look at and study and try to understand who's having what and for what reason. So it is difficult. Um, but I mean, I've got some people around me now where I live who are close friends and that, but they don't believe me, and they have. I mean, one of them, she has very positive experiences, you know, spiritual experiences, a lot of the time in places like North America and South America and that. But she knows I have military stuff. But lately she's been like, it's all nonsense and that. But I feel sometimes people who attack, sometimes they attack because maybe they're having these experiences, but they're not ready to understand them. They're not ready to look. And so they will attack that person who is having those experiences because maybe it reminds them too much. Then, in actual fact, something unusual is happening in their own world, but they're just not ready yet to make that connection.
I think you're definitely onto something there. It's very true that like if you start telling people something that makes their reality
Yeah,
uncomfortable or challenges their reality, they tend to get hostile. Some
they
people call it
flip out. Yeah,
yeah, some people call it the Agent Smith effect here in Canada. Like you'll say
yeah.
something that just bothers their matrix, and all of a sudden they're they're at you. Like no, I absolutely agree that that's
Uh,
a huge thing.
I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's more comfortable for them, isn't it? It's, they're pulling up the blinds, and when they're stepping out from behind that blind, which is their reality, coming into our reality, it's a little bit like being out in the cold. They can't take it, so they have to step back, pull the blind down, and they're quite safe there for now. But eventually, this type of phenomena will eventually in the future, I guess, he will have a larger impact on the world itself and everyone in it. It'll be something you won't be able to hide from no more.
I can see that coming very quickly as well. I just want to share with the listeners and viewers. Your preface has an absolutely brilliant quote, and I wrote it down here. And it's by Alice Little. As traumatized children, we always dreamed that someone would come and save us. We never dreamed it in fact would be ourselves as adults. And that really is so true on so many levels for a lot of people involved on the SSP because there's a lot of people who get stuck in that mentality and it becomes their lives, and you have to rescue yourself. You have to, and you do a wonderful job of it, I might say. Like you have to be able to balance the two realities because we still have to exist in both.
Yeah,
So you
Yeah, we
you do
do.
really have to rescue yourself.
I think that's what we do in the end. I mean, you know, it's sometimes the people that want to help you in these type of programs and that. Sometimes you find that they're actually working against you. You know, I mean, there is, you know, in the SSP communities, there is a lot of paranoia as well with stuff. But sometimes the paranoia is justified in regards to what they've been through, but sometimes regards to the people that they have associations with are part of these projects. You know, for somebody on the outside, it might be difficult for them to understand that, but you know, it's the projects and programs for the SSP as well. They're specially designed so that the Joe public would like to think that the people in having these experiences are a little bit unhinged and psychotic, when in actual fact, you know, that's actually not the case.
That was actually something else you had touched on in your book, when you were having your paranormal experience as a kid, that your general practitioner wanted to slap you with a diagnosis or a label and some medication. And I found that really interesting because I actually, at a very young age, ended up with a label and some medication and some time in a psychiatric hospital. And because I was expressing some things that didn't make sense to anybody else around me. Right, I was experiencing things. When I was 14, I had an experience with MK Ultra, and of course, to everybody else, I sounded like I was absolutely insane. So I be checked, right? So
yeah, I mean, my doctor, you know, the GP was a friend of my dad's. You know, they were both Irish, and he tried to have me sectioned under the Mental Health Act. That's because of an experience, you know, that I can talk about in a bit, with my dad. And he, you know, he thought I was having a, you know, psychotic episode because what I was explaining to him didn't exist in his world. It didn't exist, you know. So he then went into his medical mind and thought, you know, and he was actually telling my mum at the time, you know, if she didn't give consent, he had the power to come and take me by force. I mean,
that's
you know, he said that he wanted to study me in basically a psychiatric unit where I'd be caged and given drugs every day. You know, but with the knowledge that we have now in regards to the military projects and programs, you know, that could have been a concern for me because a lot of these psychiatric centers are run by the very people that have put us on the programs,
yeah, no,
especially the Rothschilds, and you know, they run a lot of the medical psychiatry organizations in the background, and a lot of the time for us they can be also places where, you know, they program us.
I agree because there's public education is another great place for that family to be involved, and like
Sure.
there's a lot of things like my wife and I went to school in the same province and not
Mm.
even that far away from each other, but had completely different public school experiences where like I was taken out of class and these things that were like tests and was this stuff, and she's like that no, 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 and it's like, well, did you guys have this? And it's like no, and it's like we both went to public school in the same province in the same time frame. This doesn't make sense. I was subject to much different education system, and they were testing.
I mean, yeah, I mean, in the higher school, you know, the secondary school in the UK that I went to, you know, again, it was a strict Roman Catholic boys' school. The girls actually went in on the higher years before they went into what would be university. You know, this is the school where, you know, they had the capes, you know, and the wooden boards.
Yeah.
But I mean, I had a lot of strange things happen to me there as well. And I remember also going into a different part of the school away from the other kids, and that's something where I have fragmented memories of. So I'm not sure what happened there, but as I described in the book, you know, what happened to me when I was on my way to school, and then
Yeah.
I spoke to one of the teachers, and the only sympathy he gave to me was that I was a troublemaker.
Yeah. Um, do you actually want to recap some of the stuff that went on in your childhood home, like as far as with your family and even in the school too?
Yeah, I mean, um, one of the things I had is that when my I wrote some things down. When I was 15 years old, my dad passed from he had a massive heart attack. I actually had an argument with him the night before, and then the next day he was gone. Um, so, but before he passed, though, in the house itself, we used to have it, and it was always in the summertime. It was over several summers. When we were in isolated areas in the house, each one of us experienced this really strange buzzing sound. And at first, we used to think it was a fly going around or something like that. But it was like really, it was always when you got your back turned and doing something, when you were alone. And also it's inside the inner ear. You could hear it. It's so loud. And you used to turn around really quickly, thinking it was something. And there was never, ever anything there. And each one of us in the household, whilst they were alone, experienced this. And you would hear it maybe for a few minutes. And, at first your left brain kicks in and you think, you're trying to reason again what it could be. So we went around the house looking, and there was never nothing there. And this was happening like sometimes, it was happening quite a lot in the summertime. And but as I said, we had this. But I remember when my dad passed, myself and my mum, when we were laying down on the bed, I at first I was listening. I could hear when I was laying on my pillow, I could hear this really strange breathing sound, going, like that. And it was actually coming from underneath my pillow. And I remember lifting, stupidly, you're lifting up your pillow, thinking, what is that? It's just something you do, don't you? When you're thinking about these things, you're not thinking in the other sense that it's probably coming from somewhere else. and then I remember once being in the room when my mum was there, and she was laying on her bed, and there was a spare bed, in the back of the room. And she could hear the same thing I was listening to. And my mum said to me that she could hear a strange breathing sound coming from beneath her pillows. And I said to her, Mum, I can hear the same thing as you coming from under my pillow. And it was almost like, and at one time I could hear voices, like different sounds, different people speaking to me, but I could never quite hear what they were saying. I mean, I have these experiences now, and I had them in the 1990s quite a lot. Where I could hear these voices. Some of them were demonic sounds as well, like what you could hear, someone talking to you, and there was like two or three, four voices overlaid together, some of them male, some of them female. But then the voices started to change and become more sinister, in that they were like laughing at you, but it was like really a feeling of evil, really.
Yeah.
That you hear it, um, and one of the other experiences I had in the house at the time was, in my book I call it "Come with Us" in one of the chapters, where I describe being again in my mum's room. I used to When my mum used to go to bed, she used to have a hot milk and listen to a radio station that she liked, and sometimes I used to sit on the other bed, in the corner of the room, and I used to speak to her about her day, just after my dad died, so it wasn't long after he died. Um, and I remember one time when I was laying on this bed and I was looking out where the windows were, and suddenly at first I could feel the energy in the room change, and we described that with when you're an abductee, this feeling of, sometimes it's a feeling of dread. When these particular beings are around, they're going to come and get you. It's just it's like an animal sense, really, or a sixth sense. And although it wasn't a feeling of dread this time, it felt like the energy, there was a build-up of electricity in the room, quite static energy. And then when I was looking towards the windows, I saw this bright light come down from the sky just over the rooftop of the house and where the windows were. So it was quite bright. And then I remember having a sharp pain go in my head, and I could hear this really loud ringing sound and buzzing sound in literally in my head. It was so loud I couldn't hardly hear the radio on the other side of the room. And I felt at the time, I felt a feeling of being paralyzed, but not totally. Normally before, when I've had these type of experiences, abductions, your body becomes paralyzed. You can't move, but you can move your eyes, but not anything else. But on this particular occasion, I remember I was able to move a little bit in my body. And then it was at that point, though, that I started to rise up off the bed. So I was rising up off the bed, and then on the side of the wall, there was a wall mounted radiator, a heater. And I remember coming up at the top of this, where the top of the radiator was, and I was able to reach out. That's why I said I had a temporal, it was only a little bit paralyzed. I could move a little bit. So I remember reaching out and holding on to this metal radiator, and I could feel all of my body start to sweat, literally pouring with sweat. And the radiator, by the way, wasn't on. This was in the summertime. And in my head, I was saying in my head to let me go. I remember saying to whoever could hear me, I said, "Let me go. I'm not ready to go with you yet." And the moment I said that, the light vanished. It just like switched off almost. And then I come crashing down onto the bed. And I remember going over to the windows, moving across to the windows. But again, I felt weak. My body was weak. And I was shifting a little bit over to the windows. And the moment I got to the window, I just pulled back the curtain. And I was literally looking up in the sky, looking for where this light come from. And there was just nothing there. It was just pitch black. But I remember going then back to my bed. And, at the time, what was strange, I didn't ask my mum anything. She was there. I didn't ask her anything. I just lay on the bed. And as far as I know, I just went to sleep. But the next day, I remember being in the kitchen. My mum was standing in the kitchen at the kitchen sink, and she was peeling, potatoes. And I was standing on the doorstep actually eating some breakfast out of a bowl of, a ceramic bowl, and looking out. And I was thinking about the night before. And then when I went back in, I asked my mum, I said, "Mum, do you remember anything about last night?" And she went on to say that she saw the light above the roof shining down, and she heard buzzing sounds.
Was that? Oh, but
yeah, sorry, Don.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to ask, was that the same incident with the stretcher that you were talking about in your book?
No, this was a different one.
Okay. No, please carry on. I do want to ask you about that one too, though, because that was fascinating.
And she saw the lights. She heard this buzzing in her head, and she said that she witnessed me being floated up above the bed. And she wanted to do something, but then when she was thinking about doing something, she heard a voice say to her in her head, "Do not interfere. Go to sleep." And so she also had this type of paralysis. And I think what she did, she did eventually go to sleep, but it was almost like a command: don't interfere with whatever's happening with me. And, everything will be okay, but don't get up and don't interfere. So I remember, that was quite interesting when she was telling me this. So that, this is one of the experiences, I talk about in my book with a lot more detail, but whilst we're talking here, that generally is what happened with that experience.
No, and that, like, to actually be able to have that conversation with your mom that she witnessed it, like, that must have felt great, because like we were saying earlier, it's very awkward in your life when you try to explain these things to everybody else and nobody else sees it, hears it, understands it, or experiences it. You actually had somebody in your life that was there and saw it.
But what I was going to say is what I come to understand about that experience is that they didn't let me go. They'd already taken me and they brought me back.
Oh.
Because when the greys come to get you, they never come just to get you and then be told to go away. Whenever they come to you, they will always take you, and then they bring you back. But because it's done in such, it's almost like your memory's wiped. But that's what they did, and they done that more than once with me. Even an encounter that I had inside the school where I had a meeting with one of these greys. There was a lot of build up before that, but one minute they were there, the next minute they were gone. But then it was much later on I realised they'd actually taken me and brought me back.
Something I was going to ask you, because I've had my own experiences, and it kind of ties into what you're saying, is the experience of time dilation during an abduction. Like, one of my own that I've shared before on my show is I went to go pick up my wife the one day. I'm driving along just like any other day. I live in rural Alberta, so there's really nothing anywhere to look at because we live
Yeah.
in the part of the province that's the prairies, right? So I'm driving along, and there was like a silver flash in the left upper side of my driver's door, and then like it came across my windshield. And instead of the typical reaction of what's that, the first thing that came to my mind was not again. And
Yeah.
then I was like 2 minutes up the road and at my turn, which is about 2 miles, right? And like something, there was just a flash and everything was back, and I was all of a sudden at this turn. But what happened after is like I was the most irritable asshole. Like, I was angry at my wife, I was angry at my dogs, I was angry at my kid. I was just upset. The next night I had a sleep experience where I was back aboard the ship, and I was like, what is going on? What is this? And they're like, oh, we screwed up by 2 minutes. And I'm like, do you realize how upset my life has been? Because like I think exactly what you're talking about is some type of time dilation. When you get abducted, they take you out, do whatever they have to do, and then just put you back. But sometimes when they put you back, they fuck it up and it becomes noticeable. Oh, did you freeze? Uh-oh. I think I lost him. What is going on? I hope he comes back. Uh-oh. Am I still on the air? Can you guys still hear me? Okay. I'm gonna message him here, guys. I'm sorry, I don't know where he's gone. Wow, this is. Just bear with me here, guys. I don't know if we were telling too much of the truth or not supposed to share that, but yeah. Wow. Yeah, my whole thing just reset, so I'm not sure. Um, okay, so I just messaged him on social media, so we'll give that a couple of minutes. I don't know where he was gone to. This is crazy. Yeah, Sandra, I think you might be right on that one. Um, this always seems wow. Like, should I call him? All right, I'll give him a few minutes here. Um, I did message him. And thank you all for staying up with me. I know, Sandra, you're over in Germany, so it's probably early in the morning there now. Nancy, what part of the world are you from? Uh, where was I? Uh, Shoot, I totally lost my train of thought. This is so bad. I lost my train of thought. I can tell you guys about the MK Ultra story that I was telling Michael about. No, I still haven't got a response back from him. Um, but when I was 14 years old, my mom was driving the school bus, and we lived in rural Ontario. And it was just like any other day. I was sitting in the back of the bus, and I just I was 14 in middle of school, whatever, and all of a sudden I just heard, "You should kill yourself," in my head, except it wasn't my own voice. And I'm like, No." And then it's like, "You should kill yourself." And I'm like, "No." And then this kept going on. And I actually started like locking eyes with my mom in the bus mirror because I was like, this is freaking me out. Like, what the hell is going on? And then I don't even so much as remember getting off the bus, but I was at home and I'd gone into my parents' living room and taken a 22 rifle off of the wall and loaded it and proceeded to put it in my mouth. And if the neighbor girl hadn't of came to borrow a video game for Nintendo, I would have probably had not been here anymore, because when she opened the door, I snapped out of whatever was talking to me and whatever was telling me to do what I was about to do. And I was only 14. It was crazy. Like, and I lived near one of the area's largest CBC broadcasting towers, and the whole town was very, very strange. Like, it was almost like Pleasantville, but redneck. And then just every now and then somebody would like end their life or their partner's life or take their family hostage, or like, and we were near the CBC tower and across the bay from the tank range. So it was just this strange little surreal town. Oh, hi, Angel Wings. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the whole town was an experiment because, like I said, like my wife went to school in the same area, and like we had very, very different experiences in the public education system. Um, so yeah, I I'm gonna give him a call. Let's call him. I got nothing. Okay. Well, shit. I don't really know what to do here, guys. I absolutely agree with that. Was a lot of posting on. Yeah. Like, oh, he's back. Michael's back. Hold on. I got you. Maybe. Where'd you go? Why am I freezing up here?
I got cut off, so and nothing new.
No. I'm just trying to get me back on the stage here. I'm having technical difficulties now. Of course.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, like my computer is completely glitching out.
Yeah, I can see you're glitching a bit.
This is crazy. There we go. Holy cow. We're both back on the screen. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I got for some reason.
So we'll just recenter. I'll probably cut that out. We are back live. Are you good to continue, Michael?
I am, yes.
Okay. So we had just left off with the shared experience between you and your mom.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, and then I kind of started to prattle off, but we'll pick it back up there if you want.
Sure.
So yeah, if you want to go from there, or I do have a question about another experience that was similar that kind of relates to that.
Yeah.
In your book, you have an experience about a stretcher. And I was wondering if you can share that because I do actually have some follow up on the two experiences and the similarities.
Yeah, that was one night time when I was laying in bed. Something woke me up. I'd been sleeping. My brother at the time, because we were young and it was a small house, we slept in the big bed together. But often when I was having these experiences, he would never wake up. I used to shrug him and elbow him, but he would never wake up from his sleep. It almost felt like it was a bit like my mum's situation before, to remain asleep whilst they did what they did with me. But I remember waking up from my sleep, and it was the night time. Everyone was in bed. My parents' room was actually right next to door to where our bedroom was. You could literally walk out the door and their bedroom door would be there. Although my bedroom or our bedroom door, me and Sean's room, was opened slightly, I remember looking at the rear of the bed and there was these three, greys, what we know now as typical greys, just standing there, just staring over at me. And I remember two of them breaking away and coming towards my side of the bed. And I remember being paralyzed, but I remember being floated up slightly out of the bed. And I was actually lifted up. And then when I was coming back down, there was a stretcher or a cot, I guess. what they call cots,
Yeah.
And I was basically placed down on this, black stretcher. And then again, I thought at the time, I didn't think then, but when I was writing my book, when you look back and you're reliving the experiences, you know, you're going through it all in your head. I mean, some of the unusual things there is that it was, I didn't call out to my parents, they were literally next door. And often the time when you're paralyzed, you find you can't really use your vocal cords. You're normally, when you are shouting, it's in your head. Because you understand quite quickly that using your mouth is impossible. But again, I could see slightly in the room. My eyes could adjust slightly, and I remember the stretcher then rising up off the bed and moving over Sean, moving towards the windows, and I actually went through the windows, not through but actually through the pane of glass, and then just outside of this bedroom window was a rooftop which acted as a type of balcony, from where I had another experience in the room below at another time. And the stretcher was actually laid on this roof. And again, this was a busy area of London, and not far away from where my house was one of the largest and biggest police stations in London. And there was always police cars at night throughout the day coming in and out of this. It was actually at the back where they come in and out. I mean, at the time you don't think of it, but you think of it when you're writing the book. Surely, someone would have seen this odd sight of these greys. And I remember then the stretcher was rising up, and just above again the house, maybe just off a little bit from the house itself, again was a brilliant white light coming from this unknown source in the sky. And I remember when the stretcher was going up, I could see the windows, and then I could see the roof of the house, and I could look that way or that way, just slightly that way, but more that way, and I could see the buildings that were surrounding the school itself. There was warehouses, and there was like a pub, and then I could see just slightly in front of me as it was rising up. But as I got closer towards the light, I don't remember anything after that. The next memory that I have is waking up in my bed. It's daytime, and my nose is bleeding, and there's blood on the pillow. And that was the first time I started to have my nose would bleed very easily as a child and as a teenager. It was also the first time I started to have sinus problems, which I still have to this day.
Um, Something you mentioned there about like passing through the window and stuff. I just from listening to you talk, I know you're a very smart guy. Um, do you think whatever it is that's doing these abductions has the technology or ability to basically manipulate the molecular construct of this reality in order to make like a solid pass through a solid? Because my understanding of it is everything has a vibration and resonance, and if you change it, you can move it, right? Do you think they are that far advanced from us that they've figured out how to move Michael through the window at this vibration, or do you think it's some type of technology?
I don't think that. I don't think, to be honest with you, that they're as advanced as us. I think we've caught up to them quite a lot now, and we can do a lot more than what they can do as well with our technology. But I do, I mean, it is a science, isn't it? It's not really, we can look at it as a mystical science, I guess. But it is more or less, nothing is solid in the world, is it? It is, it is about atoms and molecules moving in a certain way, and we have the ability to influence and, in a way, manipulate these. So I think it's very possible to do that, either, with the mind. But I think a lot of the time the Greys use a mixture of technology and psychic type abilities, maybe a little bit of both, where they enhance their abilities by using this type of technology, which could possibly be like spiritual type technology. But in their case, it's not so spiritual, but more used for nefarious purposes, especially with children.
Yeah. Our mutual friend there, Sandra D, in the audience says stretchers sound very military.
Yeah, it is. That's right, Sandra. I mean, it's not something the Greys would normally take to an abduction when, if they can move, through physical matter, but I think that had more of a feel of a human element to it.
And that's something too. Like, there's a high correlation between people that have been abducted and people with my lab experiences and people with SSP experiences. They all seem to correlate together. And like, it really is hard to filter through what's a screen memory, what's an abduction, what was in my lab, what was, it. And I think Sandra's onto something there with the stretcher sounding very military. I never even put that together, but yeah, that
I
is
mean,
kind of odd.
with the SSP, most of the people in the SSP that have undergone, they've been abductees first. So the abduction phenomena has come first, and then the military have caught up with the abduction, either through the agreed treaties or going off and doing their own thing. It's probably a little bit of both, really, from what we know now about these type of projects. Um, but I think the military and the Greys, whoever, they use different types of methodology to achieve things. But bringing a stretcher to an abduction seems more human to me.
It really does. Like, now that she mentioned that, I didn't really put that together, but yeah, it does seem like a very human element. Like, if they need a secondary object to levitate where a gray would just levitate you, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
actually,
yeah. I mean, I think I think it could also be to, in some ways, and I'm not defending the Greys in any way, shape, or form, because I never do, but not the Greys that are involved with the programs, should I say, because there are Greys that have nothing to do with these type of projects that are very benevolent, but the ones that I talk about are the specific ones that deal with abducting children for their projects. And then, but it seems like by using the stretcher, as I said, we have the technology to do this now because it's science. It's nothing. It's nothing miraculous. It's not. It's just understanding how things work, and then and applying it to science, and that's all this is. So I don't find anything like levitating or moving through physical objects something that's a wow factor. I think it's quite normal.
yeah,
And I think we've done it, in our ancient past. It's just that it's been hidden from us.
I
And obviously, we in the public, even us involved in these projects, we don't have per se access to it.
yeah. And speaking of the technology that's being used, do you buy into the theory, thought, whichever you want to call it, that the Greys are using a biological robot, right? Like, they're putting their conscious, just like you and I are a higher form of consciousness having a human experience. Are they doing something similar in their own creation where they're not actually here? They're just controlling a biological robot.
I mean, yeah, it's possible. I mean, there are different theories about the Greys. I don't think we've come to an ultimate conclusion on them. I mean, it could be a few of these things, but we know that the Greys do work quite closely with, um, with the military and many of the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases. So, um, but it could also be what you're saying is similar to the SSP with the avatars, where the children's consciousness are placed inside an adult body, and which is very much to do with the super soldiers as well. Like
That's
altars are placed in avatar bodies in
that's
order to, it could be that even. But
yeah.
I think it's generally good to say that that line of thinking is still open.
Yeah. Well, and no, the reason I wondered about that is because, like, a lot of people are like, do Greys have souls, or do they feel like, what type of being are they?
I mean, sometimes when they're carrying out these type of productions, it does seem sometimes like they're on, that they're not necessarily a biological being. It seems like sometimes they could be more like a machine carrying out a set of orders, a set of a set of tasks that being programmed into them to do it, and that might also be one of the reasons why. Not, I don't know, but it could be one of the reasons why they always seem to be emotionless. They don't have any emotions. They just seem to be getting on with what they're doing, regardless if you're feeling pain. It's a little bit, I guess, in some ways like artificial intelligence.
That makes sense. I'm just going to skip to something here because it's a question that's just been in my head. When I first had my first encounter, the movie E.T. was just out. And, of course, that's what my parents thought I'd seen. You had a similar experience, but it was with the movie Close Encounters, and your dad wasn't even into it, right? So, do you think that maybe that movie was introduced to your childhood, so you might think it was just all your imagination? Like, because I do think Hollywood and these companies do release movies to make people think their experiences are just that fictitious. Like, oh, that you couldn't have had that close encounter of the third kind because that's a movie kind of thing.
Well, a lot of the experiences that I had happened before all these movies come out, and obviously, again, because I grew up in a strict Roman Catholic environment, and also as a child very isolated as well, outside of those type of communities. And so we didn't, me and Sean, when he was having some of these experiences with me as children, we didn't have that type of, we wasn't looking at the TV that much, and when we did, it was with our parents.
Yeah.
So that's quite controlled. But, like if anything, we would have seen, the Virgin Mary or something, or Jesus coming to us,
Yeah.
but we wasn't having none of these. But I mean, when we did go to see the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I mean, it was I don't remember a lot about it. I remember going there because it was Sean's birthday, and Dad went with us, and I asked him what he thought of it, but he didn't seem to understand any of it, and which like I thought was a little bit odd. He didn't really say anything about it. Yeah, at the same time, when we were having these experiences, he seemed to think there was nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And no, what I was kind of alluding to there was like I do think these movies are released into the public, so like if kids go to their parents and try to say, "Oh, I had this experience." No, you didn't. You saw an ad for a movie. I know that might be more here in North America, but I know that was the first thing I experienced. Like I tried to tell my parents about what had happened the first time, and they're like, "Okay, but we just watched ET 2 weeks ago," and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." Right. So I blew it off for years until I actually underwent hypnosis and went, "Oh shit, it was real." Right.
Yeah. I mean, you got someone in the chat room, Angel Wings, they said about manipulating the energy, and they do that, yeah, as well. That's
Yeah.
a very, very, very good, that's it, very good point.
Yeah.
And yeah, they obviously do steal the energy as well. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
No, that is a very valid point. Shoot. I lost my train of thought here. This is why I write things down. Uh, oh, another thing that you mentioned, and I had never heard of it before in your book, was angel hair. Speaking of angel wings, can you tell everybody what that is? Because I had never heard of it, and I actually had to look it up.
Yeah, it's a substance that is believed to fall from a lot of these craft. Some believe it could be part of the propulsion systems of these craft, and often there is been a lot of cases over the decades where when there's been sightings of craft in the sky, this was more or less, I would say, in the 1950s and 60s. This particular substance, which is, it's almost like, people seem to articulate it to be like spider's web, and it seems to fall from these type of craft whenever they're in the vicinity of a location. Not all the time, but during these times, what I'm talking about in the 50s and 60s, there was always this substance that was found. Could be on buildings, on the grass, and when it's examined, it's got a strange normally a texture to it. Sometimes it can have almost like a green or blue dye type color to it. But often as well as when it's touched or it's placed in a jar, it will immediately disintegrate. It will vanish before I guess you can study it. But this happened to me though. I remember in my childhood home when something flew over the house. It was in the daytime, and this substance was basically littered all over the place. It was over the house, over what would be like the garage outbuilding, and over the fences. And at the time, I didn't know what it was, But I remember on this particular time, I don't know if my dad called anyone, but these men come and they had biological warfare type suits on, and they were taking samples of this substance, but I don't know who they were and where they come from. They could have been from the environmental health. I really don't know, but I just remember witnessing this. And in my book, I do give a few case histories, which which basically places my story with that. Really, I mean, one of them's even based over a schoolhouse.
Yeah.
So I put that in the book because it sits well with the storyline in my book.
No, and I found that fascinating. Like that one really got my mind going. Like I'm still sitting here wondering what that was. Like, was it alien tech or some type of military nuclear propulsion? And that was a discharge, like how a car has exhaust,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, there's so many possibilities with that. It just fascinates, and it would have been amazing to get a sample of one of those, that like some of that stuff, because what was it?
I mean, I would imagine that the military have got hold of this stuff. I'm pretty sure there are some modern cases as well where this type of substance has been thrown off from this particular craft. But I don't think it's. I think it's more of the saucer type craft rather than any of the black type military ones that you see. I think it's more. I'm not completely sure, but I think most of this research that I did on it seems to be based around more of the ones similar to the one behind you,
Yeah.
Don, like that.
That was kind of a running joke. I had a sighting when I was a teenager, and there was actually 5 kids and 2 adults that all saw it. And we lived across the bay from a military base, and we called the next day. Well, one of the parents called the next day, like, what was that? And they're like, oh, that was flares. Michael, for the life of
Interesting.
me, I have never seen 5 flares come up in the air, like just appear in the air. They didn't even come up, they just appeared in the air and then go back and forth across the entire horizon at hundreds of miles an hour. And the truly insane thing about this story is I just started talking about it for the first time last year. The first time I did, one of my friends that was there went, Donald, it was 1994. It was out in Campbell. It was this, and this. And I'm like, you don't watch my show, do you? And she's like, no. I'm like, I didn't message you about this, did you? And she's like, no. And I'm like, why are you angry? And she's like, I don't know. Go. No. I started talking about it and it triggered something in her subconscious or something energetically. But she actually angrily messaged me about the experience that we had
And this
shared.
is and this is like we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? People that have these experiences and something can trigger that anger in them, But that anger and the way that she spoke to you is not normal, is it? It's
No,
something that's coming up from maybe a memory.
yeah. I don't know if something like that I put out in the universe about bringing it up triggered a memory in her head, but it was bizarre. Like, I showed my wife, I'm like, this just really happened. Like, I talked to
Mm.
Preston Dennett about this, and then like the next day she messaged me and she was pissed off. I was like, so like I'm thinking like we remember seeing the lights, but I think a lot more happened because there's some type of psychic connection now.
Yeah, and that happens as well, doesn't it? There's all types of phenomena that come out of these things.
Yeah. Um, this is another one we share. Uh, can you tell everybody about your experience with the Man in Black?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this happened after me and Sean had a sighting of a, what would be a daylight disc, a circular type craft. That was what we see together in the school grounds, just above the school grounds. But not long after that, again, we, when we were having these sightings, we were playing inside the school grounds and sometimes the school itself because it was closed for, it was closed for the school holidays, summer holidays. So, but on this one is when I was in the house alone. My parents we just finished a meal and it was in the night time. It was what would be a school night for us, me and Sean. But my parents wanted to go into the garage, the outbuilding, and they wanted to lay a new floor, tiles, lay the floor down. And I remember my parents going out there with Sean, and I was in the house alone. I got two other brothers that I mentioned in my book, Francis and Kevin. They're a lot older than me and Sean. They were born quite a long time before me and him. And so when we were still at school, they were already out doing their own thing, or working. So they wasn't around. They were out and about socializing, I guess. And so my dad, I remember my dad telling me to, when they went out, to lock the door after they went out. So I locked the door, turned the key, and I locked the door. And I remember, doing some washing up for my mum. So I took the chair from under the table in the kitchen, and because I was small, I turned it round, so that the back of it was facing against the sink, and I was kneeling on it. And so I remember putting water in and some of this liquidy stuff that you wash up with, and I remember. But then I remember from the adjacent room. I remember when I was doing that. I remember I could see something from the side of my eyes, in the next room on the right hand side of me. And I was quite scared because I knew there was no one else in the house and everything. The front door and the back door was locked. My parents were in there. My brothers were out. There was no windows or anything like that opened. And then I saw something moving, and it looked like a black shape. A solid black shape. I remember looking then towards it. I didn't turn my head. I was just looking, and I remember seeing it being, this strange looking like man, I guess, dressed completely in black from head to toe, apart from, his shirt was white. He had a black tie and he had a black hat, like a trilby type hat. And for me, the sinister thing about it was more the glasses, the black glasses, and he was just standing there, just, I guess, staring at me. And then I turned back, looking then directly in front of me, what would be a glass window with curtains, white net curtains at the time. And I felt quite scared. And I remember, I still had like a cup, a china cup in my hand that I was cleaning with a sponge in my hand, and it was held under the water. And I could feel my heart, beating quite a lot. And I didn't really know what to think of it. And I remember then when I had the opportunity, I could see that he wasn't there no more, So I quickly got down from the chair, rushed towards the door. My hands were trembling, because I didn't know who was there, and I didn't know what their intentions were. I was in the house alone, and then I was turning the key, and it wouldn't open because I was panicking, and I was looking over my shoulder to see he's not coming towards me. And then I remember then rushing out of the door, rushing around to the garage door and banging on the metal door, And then eventually my dad opened the door slightly and he come out from under it. And I told him that, Dad, there's somebody in the house. And, he could see that I was frightened. So he went in then to investigate. But at the time, my brother Francis was coming through the gate and he said to him, that I've seen somebody in the house. So my mum and my Sean stayed in the garage. My dad and my brother went in, but they searched top and bottom and everything. There was no windows broken, no windows open. The door, the front door, it had a chain. You could chain it up and two bolts on the top and the bottom, and it was locked with a key as well. That was secure. And so they couldn't find anyone. But that was the first time, I had this encounter with this particular being. I did have other encounters with the men in black and woman in black at one time. But these were a lot of my experiences, including with my abductions and with these encounters, were outside of the body. Because I've always been, as I explained, I've always been able to travel consciously outside of the body, and I can do this with quite a lot of ease. This was something that was highlighted as well in my DNA when I was tested by the military, because when you inside your DNA, it holds information similar to the Book of Life, which is again another name for the Akashic records. So it also holds genetic markers, and with their technology, they're able to pinpoint not only if you've lived here before, the lifetimes you've lived in history. They can also pinpoint if you've been outside of here, living on other worlds, in other dimensions, and they can also pinpoint your particular skill sets that you have or had, but are still contained within your soul, which they then use to in their black op projects all over the earth, outside the earth, and in very many other places. So they use these, and this is what you talk about on the SSP as well, how they use the altars.
And that actually is what I wanted to ask you about, is what you're talking about, to my understanding, and please help me if I'm getting it mixed up, is basically stages of your conscious existence, right? Like the places you've been, things you've done, people you've been. And I've been actually experimenting a bit with this myself. And what I'm trying to figure out is, do you think that there is a way that we can selectively go to, like, okay, I go to like other stages of reality where like I'm a super soldier. Can you actually figure out how to select where you go when you go to sleep? Because like
You can.
I believe Dolores Cannon, like our body goes to sleep, our spirit doesn't. It's not just going to sit here for 8 hours and go, well, this is fun. Like we are conscious energy, we are alive, and it's not going to go to sleep just because the body is. Do
No,
you?
sure. I mean, we can do that, Don. We can. I mean, I've had the experiences where it's two. Sometimes you control where you go. So when you come outside of the body, you've got two types of things. You can have an out of body experience, which is in your immediate location, or travel around the inner part of the earth, this part, or outside of the earth, as you would go outside of the atmosphere of the earth, say to the moon or somewhere like this, because there's no distance that you can't go. And you're going to come back again. But other times I might say I want to go to a particular place. For instance, if I was here, I might want to go back to my childhood home and have a look around, not in the grounds itself. And I've done that many times. But often, sometimes when I'm going to a place, I'm drawn to somewhere else. It's like I'm going that way, but then suddenly, actually, you're not going that way. You're going this way. And sometimes that's because of your higher mind is guiding you to another place it wants you to go. No, I've had positive experiences with this, but also it's another way that the military can abduct you. A lot of my labs, the military abductees, and even with the SSP, you often can get abducted by this means because it's an easy way to do it. And a lot of the time as well, when the children involved in these projects, MK Ultra, even at Montauk and the Monarch projects and so forth, a lot of the time they pass you around, traffic you around, not in the physical necessarily, but outside of the body, because it's easier to do it and to program you outside of the body. Another way that they do it as children is that they move you in the underground networks below the buildings where you can go, almost like using the maglev trains, like
Yeah.
bullets. So they can move you from one place to another, especially like in London. London's literally like filled with tunnels, not just from World War II, but ones that go right back. That some of them they found and some of them they've rebuilt using their own, methods. But there's a lot of And we've got all these type of, these pathways all across the planet. And it just happens that they have access to almost every single one of them. So it's a good way of, again, trafficking children, a good way of moving children or adults around when they go missing in forests.
That is you just kind of blew my mind there. Like, I never really thought about that, but yeah, it really is just another way of kidnapping, because that's pretty much what happens in these programs. Is just
I mean, it's almost like, in the forests as well, in the United States or Canada, I guess you often have these children or adults. And I was talking about this to someone the other day, how these experienced people, these hunters that know the forests like the back of their hands, they've gone out there, they've got rifles, and then suddenly the rifles are separated from the person. The person's clothes are neatly piled on a stone. Well, they often find these items close to where there is water. So, so one of the things that I discovered as well, especially in Ukraine, where the Ukrainians the military are actually trafficking children during the war, and they're using the waterways because there are stargates underneath some of the waters. And these can be then trafficked through these tunnels, these stargates, into the deep military underground bases. And again, it's a good way, if any of the people that are coming looking for you, there's not going to have hardly any tracks. It's going to be the big question mark, the big mystery of where they've gone. But many of them go to the deep underground military bases, and the children especially will never be seen again. Once they're in them bases and they're on them projects, that's it. It's over for them, I'm afraid. They will have the rest of their lives will be dedicated to being the lab rats.
Sorry, Michael, I'm having technical difficulty here again. My whole screen just disappeared.
Yeah, mine was done earlier.
I don't know what's going on. Yeah, like I just lost my whole screen again. Shit. This is terrible. I might have to end this for tonight, Michael, because my computer just froze.
Okay, you're right at the moment, are you?
Yeah, like I can't even see you. I can see the two of us in a small picture in the corner, but I think my computer is cooked. This is crazy. All right. Are you willing to come back when I get my technical issues figured out here?
Yeah, there's a lot to speak about.
Yeah, and we've already gone an hour, even minus the interruption, and covered a lot. So we'll book something for a month or two from now. I think I have something in March. I am so sorry, Michael. I feel like an ass, but yeah, my whole system just went down, and I'm looking at a blank screen. I literally just
all right.
two small pictures.
It happened to me as well, didn't it? Where I got cut off. So
yeah. So for everybody still watching and everybody at home, thank you so much, Michael. I know they can still hear you. I don't know if they can see me. Do you want to tell everybody where to reach you and where to get your book?
Yeah, my book is available on Amazon. It's in soft cover, hard cover. It's audio, and it's on Kindle. And I'm active a lot. You can see me on Facebook under Michael Kameron with a K. I do have another Facebook page, but it's not named Michael Kameron. It's under a different one for the SSP.
Yeah.
But thanks everyone in the chat room that's come along to have a listen in. And to everyone that I know in the chat room, thanks very much for supporting me as usual.
Yeah. And thank you for staying up late, and Sandra for you staying up late. And I always appreciate you doing these interviews because I know it's like ridiculous o'clock there. And as for everybody else in the chat and everybody listening, if you can go outside because it's much better than sitting in front of a screen. Thank you so much. All right. Good night. Love you. If I can even end the stream now. This is crazy.